Hello, everybody. This is Keith Caldwell with Failure to Plan, and I've got with me Ryan Platt with a special needs plan, Bernard Krooks with Littman Krooks. So I'd like to start off by having Ryan give us a quick overview of who he is and what he's all about.
Sure. Thanks, Keith. I have, I guess, telling you a little bit about me. I have 4 children. And so we continually stay busy, which is a lot of fun. We started a special needs plan about 8 years ago, really focused on serving families that have either minor children or adult children or even spouses that have special needs and need to ensure that their future is secure and taken care of as best as possible. And so we've been doing that now for about 8 years.
Excellent, excellent. Hey, Bernie, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Certainly, Keith. Happy to be here today. And our law firm, Littman Krooks, was started in 1990, almost a quarter century ago. And we have the great blessing of being able to assist and work with families who have individuals in that family who have special needs, and we help them navigate the maze. And as you know personally, it is a maze. There's no handbook out there. So we feel blessed and fortunate to be able to help families get the services they need for their children and adults with disabilities so that they can enjoy the best quality of life possible.
Excellent. How's Max doing, by the way?
My inspiration, just my pride and joy. It really is a beautiful thing. Terrific, thank you.
Excellent. Well, I should probably tell everybody who I am and how I got here. I am a dad. I don't want to say just a dad, but I am a dad. And one day I just woke up in the middle of the night wondering what would happen if something were to happen to me, to my child. So I didn't have an answer to that. And I realized after talking to other parents that they may not have answers to that as well. So that's where Failure to Plan came up. And I just called these 2 men out of the blue and said, hey, I'm a dad. I'm not a financial planner. I'm not an attorney. I don't have answers to these questions, and they were kind enough to sort of sit and talk with us today, and they're just a wealth of knowledge. So this is what Failure to Plan is all about, is helping educate parents about the special needs planning process, because we need to do it. We can't just ignore it. Just ignoring it means it's not being planned properly, and we can't leave our kids like that. So that's what Failure to Plan is all about. And although both Bernie and Ryan are both licensed professionals, I just want to put the caveat out there. They're not providing legal or financial advice to anybody here. They're just providing general information. So if you have any specific questions that you have, please contact either Bernie direct or Ryan direct, or and talk to them about their specific needs. So I'd like to just jump in sort of with some questions I had for people. Ryan, this is for Ryan. Can you give me a brief overview of what is special needs planning and what types of things parents should look for and include within their special needs plan?
Sure, absolutely, Keith. You know, when we think about special needs planning, we really think of it almost, if you can picture the sun and the planets around it. So it's kind of a solar system. And the family is in the middle of that solar system. You guys are the sun. And there are certain pieces that are around you that just need to be considered and also need to be coordinated together properly. So everything functions for the purpose of making sure that your loved one is taken care of no matter what. And so, you know, when we think about that planning, one thing that we'll talk about as time goes along today is making sure that the family has created a story. I always call it a story for not only the entire family, but also for that individual with a disability, and really creating that story for their entire life. So what does that look like? Where might they live? What options are there in their area? You know, who's going to be the future caregiver? How is that going to function? What does daily life look like? And who's going to be involved in that? And then, you know, once the story is more defined for their family, then you have to coordinate those other pieces. So some of those planets in the solar system would be, you know, the financial piece. Another piece of the solar system, another planet, is the legal piece that Bernie is going to probably go into a great deal of detail on, which is fantastic. There's also a tax planet that has to be considered as well. There's obviously the government benefit planet that we need to understand how that works, when to access it, what's going to be available and when, and how those benefits change over an individual's lifetime, as well as over a parent's lifetime going forward, that may impact their child's benefits as well. And then there's certainly for families, there's kind of that employee benefit for the parent planet over there, that, you know, how can you use your employee benefits, or if you own a business, how can you use that to positively impact that story going forward. And then there's something we kind of call the communication planet, which is, you know, this kind of process always starts with the nuclear family, with the parents, but this kind of planning, even more so than other type of planning, really needs to extend. It really needs, we need to educate extended family like grandparents, aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters, because we want to ensure that if they plan on doing anything, especially financially, for your child, maybe their grandchild or their niece or nephew, that they do it in the right way also. So we need to communicate to them why you've done this planning and why it's important to possibly update the pieces they've done, so that everything does work to the benefit of what I kind of call lasting independence for everyone.
Right.
So that vision can securely happen, that the parents and the individual with the disability wants to create.
Excellent. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that overview. Bernie, do you have anything you'd like to add from a legal perspective or from your own experience to something that Ryan just said?
Sure, Keith, and Ryan really eloquently laid out a lot of the issues that family members need to think about when you've got a family member with special needs. And one of the most difficult things for people to get their arms around is that they're not going to be here one day. And due to advances in modern medicine and life expectancies of people with special needs now getting closer and closer to life expectancies of typical individuals, there's a significant likelihood that your child or sibling or family member will be here, and you won't be here anymore. So as a parent and as a counselor and as an advisor to people, we like to say we hope for the best and plan for the worst. Because the worst is you can leave my office and get hit by a car and be dead tomorrow, and then the question is, what's going to happen to your child? And we find that, while I have already stated we get great gratification out of working with families and helping them through this process, one of my biggest frustrations is people's procrastination, the failure to plan, as you say. It just is one of those things that I can't understand. While I understand that human beings have a tendency to put things off, I just don't think this ought to be one of those things. The plan that is put in place, if you work with an advisor like Ryan or myself, will be flexible. It can be adapted to the needs of the child or individual as they age and the needs change. So there's no reason not to do it now. So if we can accomplish one thing today, if one person who's participating or listening to this chat or webinar or hangout actually takes a step towards planning for one child, I'll feel like we accomplished something.
Absolutely. That's awesome, Bernie. And you know, there's a perfect segue into the question I was going to ask, which is, from your experience, Bernie, what is the greatest hindrance that parents have for getting started? And I'll share with what it was mine. I didn't know what to do. I was clueless of what to do.
It's sort of like the deer in the headlights. I mean, being a parent, Ryan mentioned he's got 4 kids. I've got 4 kids as well, and everybody wants to be the best parent they can be, and unfortunately, they don't give you a handbook on how to be a good parent. You do it your way, Ryan does it his way, I do it my way, and you know what? We all think we're right.
I am right, Bernie. I am right.
Well, then I'm going to start sending you emails when my kids getting home at 3 in the morning and acting up.
All right.
And you know what? When you have a kid with special needs, it's so much more complicated than just dealing with being a parent. But you throw that into the mix and you have the relationship of the siblings to the kid with special needs. It's so complicated to handle this. So when you're a parent, the tendency is to just sort of take it one day at a time. because the kids are going to ABA therapy, they're going to occupational therapy, going to speech therapy, dealing with issues at school, and this sort of special needs planning sort of takes a back seat. So I think that if we can simplify things so that parents understand it, because my experience is that if people don't understand things, they're not going to take action. And there used to be an investor, Peter Lynch, who managed the Magellan fund for Fidelity, which was one of the fastest growing funds of all time and most successful, at least while he was the manager. He used to say to people, buy things that you understand. So if you walk into McDonald's and there's a line outside and everybody's buying hamburgers, then that might be a good stock to buy. If you walk into another store and there's no line outside, well, maybe you go somewhere else. So people like to get comfortable with things. They want to be able to understand it. So we try to lay it out in plain English. Here's what's going to happen if you do nothing. And here's what we can do if you're willing to take some steps. And obviously decisions have to be made, both financially, decisions as to who's going to take charge if you're no longer here. And for me, that's what clients have communicated to us, is one of the main reasons they don't go forward is because they can't get to the perfect answer. And I'm here to tell you there may not be a perfect answer, because no one's going to be a parent like you, no one's going to be a dad like you, no one's going to be a mom like the moms out there. What we're trying to do is create the best quality of life possible for the child with special needs when you're no longer here.
All right, that's great, and I can attest to the fact that I didn't do anything because I just didn't know what to do. So I'm just so thankful that you guys are helping sort of pave the way for us to understand better what to do, and I'm sure the parents listening are feeling the same way. Ryan, do you have anything you'd like to add to what parents and the reason that they don't get started on this? Is it pretty much the same thing?
I would definitely have to echo what Bernie said. It definitely can feel like a very overwhelming topic, filled with worry and anxiety, especially as I laid it out with all those different planets to it. But it can also, what I always say, it can also be a liberating experience, because from parents that I talk to, this is always on their mind, whether it's on the back of their mind, because as Bernie said, they're running from therapy to therapy, from appointment to appointment, to IEPs, to all those other pieces of their life. But at 12 o'clock at night, they think, oh my gosh, if I don't wake up tomorrow, what the heck is going to happen?
That's
and
exactly
so when
it.
you have that completed, it can also be a liberating experience for parents, especially because now they know the road, they have a map, they know what's going to happen, and that concern now, although it still might be there a little bit, it's not as anxiety-ridden as it once was. And interestingly enough, Easter Seals has done a number of studies, and one of the main reasons, and Bernie can probably attest to this too, is that one of the main reasons why parents don't do anything is they don't know who to go to. They don't know who has the expertise to actually help them, because they've sat down with attorneys and financial planners and have started to talk about their world and said things like SSI and IEP and Medicaid, and those other professionals stared back at them with big eyes, and the parents already knew they had no idea what they were talking about. Right. And so they knew that they were going to teach that professional more than that professional was going to teach them. So the Easter Seal study also told us that parents just felt they had no idea who to go to because they didn't know who could help. And right. And I think that's one of the reasons that Bernie loves to do these type of education items and outreaches, and that's why we love to do them and speak at organizations and do these, so that parents can know that there are folks out there, and so that we can give them education so that you can feel more comfortable when you go talk to a professional.
Excellent. We're going to cover that a little bit later about why it's important to work with people who know what they're doing, because doing it wrong has significant implications potentially. So Ryan, I wanted to turn to you to ask you, when you first get started working with clients, can you give us a brief overview of some of the things that you sort of covered to make sure that you're talking about? And you talked about some of the planets, but what's some of the first steps that you do?
Yeah, I think the first step is really for parents is really laying out, at least for us anyway with parents, we really just lay out, here's what we would do. Here's kind of the process that you'll walk through in order to get to the final result of having that plan, having all the pieces in place, so that you can feel good about it. Because again, it's kind of going back to what Bernie said, is people want to be comfortable. They want to have a better understanding of what they're going to be doing. So we want to lay out, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3, here's the path you need to take in order to get to that final result. And for us, our first step is always creating what that story looks like. So if you think of it as a timeline, you know, we put today on one side of the timeline, and we go all the way out to what we think the end of our child's life will look like. And that's kind of the timeline of the story. And then we start working backwards from the end of your child's life to the end of the parent's life, to the parent's retirement, to other siblings, depending on how old they are and their transition. If the other siblings are minors, maybe you want them to go to college or something like that. So how does that play a role? If your child with special needs is a minor, how does that transition period work in terms of when they reach age 18 for guardianship possibilities, or when they're out of the educational system, and so an understanding of what these life stages may look like and what the needs of every individual in the family, including obviously the individual with the special needs, going to be at each one of those stages, so that you can create a plan or a map that's going to handle all those situations. As well as the one that Bernie mentioned is, you know, hopefully the movie plays out all the way through those stages, but sometimes the movie doesn't, and it gets cut short, meaning they get hit by a bus as they walk out Bernie's office. Right. Well, what happens to the rest of that story? What happens to the rest of that movie if that happens? Or if the parent is disabled, you know, what happens there? So again, so that they just have the idea of worst happens, that our story can still take place for our child and they can still live the best life possible.
You know, that's a very good point, because I think another reason that we as parents don't want to think about it is we don't want to think about our own mortality. I think that, you know, I even cringed a little bit when you were talking about the end of my life. Like, wait a minute, I don't want to talk about that, right? And I surely don't want to talk about the end of my child's life. But to be a prudent parent and to really plan, these things do occur. Whether I want to or not, one day I'm not going to be here, and whether I admit it or not, one day my son's not going to be here. And to not plan for both of those events, to make sure that he is taken care of through not only my lifetime or my unexpected demise, that I need to make sure that's taken care of. So that's one of the reasons I think parents don't want to think about it, but that's one of the reasons that we need to. So I appreciate you for bringing that up. So I have a question I'd like to ask Bernie. I know we had talked once before, a couple months back, about an article you'd written, and you said that there was essentially 5 steps that you suggest that your clients do. And the 5 steps were: 1, prepare a letter of intent; 2 is to prepare a will; 3 is to create a special needs trust; 4 is to sign advance directives; and 5 is to obtain guardianship. Do you mind just quickly describing what those 5 areas are, and then we'll talk a little bit more in depth about those? Is that okay?
Yeah, certainly, Keith. And I think the linchpin of all special needs planning has to be the letter of intent. And fortunately, this is something you can do without a lawyer or without an advisor. We ask the parents, and in many cases it's the mom, but doesn't have to be, to take out a piece of paper, or now some people do it on their phones where they take notes on the phone, and go through a period of 2, 3, 4, 5 days a week and write down every single thing that you do for your child, because you'd be amazed at how many things you do that you take for granted because you basically do them in your sleep. Things such as, does the child like to sleep on his side, on his back? Does he have 1 pillow, 2 pillows, the lights on, lights off? Or how does the child like to eat? Does he like cereal? Because many kids, unfortunately, are nonverbal, so they're not able to express their wishes and desires to the next caregiver, whoever that might be, and whenever that might be. So writing up a letter of intent, telling people what the child's likes are and dislikes are, we have found to be enormously helpful, because this person is going to be the mother or the father of this child one day, presumptively, and they're not going to have the benefit of the history that you have with this child. And this letter of intent is not something you put in a file drawer and never look at again. We like to think, you know, annually on the kid's birthday, you take it out and dust it off and see if it needs any updating. So the first thing I think people ought to do and it takes away some of the apprehension that people have about calling a lawyer or calling a financial advisor or getting involved with professionals, because they can do this on their own, and there's lots of forms out there on various websites. Do the letter of intent, and I think you'll be glad you did. The second item we talked about is a will. This also is critical.
Bernie, can I just for a quick second, I want to clarify, because I think that letter of intent is really, I want to point out, that is a great place for someone to start, because it's something you could do. It's something that's tangible. It's something that's necessary, and I think it's helpful for us to sort of ferret out exactly what you said. Is this is the things my son is nonverbal. He can't tell us what he wants to do, but I can assure you, if you do it the wrong way, your day will be bad, right? Your day will be bad. If you don't let him go through his little routine when he walks in the house and put his shoes away and put his thing away and open the sliding glass door 6 inches and then close it, if you don't allow those things to occur, like my mom did the other day, didn't allow it to occur, woo! So those little things are what I think are really, really important. Now, Heather, I thought you had a question that popped up. Oh,
I did, and it goes along with what both of them have been saying, is that people with a plan gain a sense of liberation and reduce stress levels. So, as a parent of a child with special needs, anytime that I can reduce my stress levels, it's a good thing. So I love what's being said here, that I don't even necessarily have to start by contacting a lawyer or a financial planner just to gain some ground. The idea that I can just start by writing down how I know my son best is incredible information already.
Right. I'm glad. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bernie. I'll let you go ahead and continue.
And you gave a perfect example, Keith, of how, especially with children who have behavioral issues, if you press the wrong button, and even if your intentions are good, I'm sure your mother meant well. Like when Max comes home from school, if I try to help him take off his jacket and don't let it do it himself, we are going to have a very unpleasant afternoon. 3, 4, 5 hours. Things being thrown around the house, spitting, just terrible. So
you're
just trying to help, right? But you got to know Max has to take off his own jacket. So those are the things, and you really personalized it so that people understand it. And I'm glad that everyone is recognizing that this is something that we can all do without the help of professionals. Now, one of the things that unfortunately you can't do without the help of professionals is write a will, or at least not write a will that you'd want to have. I mean, there are services. You can go online, and these days with the internet, you can take a shot at it. While I certainly wouldn't recommend that for anybody I cared about, I certainly wouldn't recommend it for somebody who's got a kid with special needs. Way too many things can go wrong, and that's really being penny wise, pound foolish. So the will gives you the opportunity to appoint guardians for your minor children in the event that you pass away while they're still minors. It gives you the opportunity to decide who's going to get your property. And a lot of times we've seen people who have wills that were made a long time ago that divides the property equally among their children without providing for any kind of special vehicles for the kid who has special needs. And that can really wreck a well-intentioned plan. If the child with special needs inherited money. And number 3 is the special needs trust, which goes hand in hand with the will. And in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, a trust is a very nice vehicle to receive the funds, and the money in the trust can be used to pay for things that might not be covered by the government. And let's face it, the federal government, the state government, they're all running out of money. And I suspect if we had this conversation 5 or 10 years from now, or maybe even less, there'd be even less benefits available for all of us, but in particular kids with special needs. So a special needs trust is a really neat way of providing funds, and working with an advisor like Ryan, he can talk to you about the various ways to fund a special needs trust and get money into a trust. And a lot of times people say, well, trusts and wills, those are for the rich and famous people. I'm just a middle-class person. I don't have a lot of money. And that's also not true. Everybody needs a will, and almost everybody who's got a kid with special needs ought to be considering a special needs trust. And I know you want to talk a little bit about that further, so I won't go into any more detail, but I promise you we will come back to it. And then the next 2 pieces are advanced directives or guardianship. An advanced directive is something you and I ought to have. In fact, I like to make sure that all of our clients have them. It gives you the opportunity to appoint someone else who you care about and trust to make decisions for you in the event that you can't make them yourself, like what kind of health care you're going to get, what's going to happen with your finances. And many people assume that just because a kid has special needs that they can't sign their own advance directives. Now, that may be true in many cases, but for a lot of high-functioning kids, when they turn 18, they should be signing their own advance directives so that mom and dad, or whomever they appoint, can have the authority to go to the doctor with them, to make medical decisions and financial decisions in the event that the child is no longer able to make them, or now an adult is able to make them for themselves in the future. Now, if when your child turns 18, it's clear that he or she is never going to have the ability to make financial decisions, to pay his or her bills with a check, to file his or her taxes, to work, to have a conversation with the doctor about what types of treatments are available. If that's clear, then there's a process that's available in all states, and it varies state by state, where you can become the legal guardian of your child. Now, for typical kids, when they turn 18, they're free as a bird. They're on their own. They make their own decisions. We may not like them as parents, but they're adults now. Right. But with kids with special needs, the law presumes that once you turn 18, you have capacity to make these decisions. And just think about the kids that we know. When they're 18, they're not going to be able to make these kinds of decisions. So we have an obligation as parents to become their legal guardian so that we can step into their shoes and make decisions with them about where they're going to go to school, if they're going to continue to go to some type of school, if they're going to live in a residential type of placement, where they're going to work. And, you know, certainly this is one of the most overlooked areas that I find in special needs planning. When the kid is under 21, a lot of attention is paid to it, and then they become adults. They're no longer entitled to go to school, so what do? So transition services, because studies have shown time after time again, people have very low self-esteem if they don't feel independent and they don't have a place in society. So getting a job, getting on a bus, being able to go to work, doing something really will improve the quality of life of somebody with special needs. So that's all hand in hand with becoming the guardian and making sure that you have a plan in place for what's going to happen after the child is no longer a child.
You know what? That's a good thing.
Bernie,
oh, go ahead, Ryan.
Could I just ask you a question on the will? Because I know some people are thinking, you know, hey, a will is just going to basically just, you know, get my stuff to whoever I want it to, and if I don't have one, it'll get to them anyway. So could you kind of give people a little bit more of an understanding of? I know it can vary state by state in terms of state laws, but you know, if they don't have a will that they've written themselves, don't they kind of have one anyway that was written by their state?
Yes, Ryan, thank you, and that's an excellent point you're raising. And this is one of the common reasons why people don't make wills, because they figure, well, the property is going to go to my wife and kids anyway, so why do I need one? Unfortunately, that's not necessarily true. Each state has a law, and I don't want to get too legal here, but it's called intestacy, where the government says if you don't make a will before you die, then we're going to decide who gets your property and what percentages they're going to get. And unless you know what those are, there's no way of you knowing whether or not that's going to meet your wishes. So for that reason alone, it makes sense to have a will. And again, this is going to be an investment. A will is not something you should have to update every year. If it's done right, I'm not going to say it's going to last the rest of your life, but you know, it should last 3 to 5 years, maybe 10, depending on your circumstances. Maybe a financial situation changes. You have new grandkids, new children, a relationship with a relative gets better or gets worse. So there may be reasons to change it, but that's an excellent point that Ryan raises, that without a will, each state has a plan for who's going to get your assets. And I think the most important thing is the child with special needs will likely inherit a portion of your money, and then that may negatively impact his or her eligibility for SSI or Medicaid and other programs, which they rely on a daily basis for medical needs, for housing. So you could really be doing a disservice to the people you care about the most by not having a will.
That is an excellent point, Ryan. I'm glad that you brought that up.
And Bernie, could you also talk a little bit? I know we kind of focused on the asset side of the will, but in a will, aren't you also focusing on, okay, who's going to be the next caregiver? That you're going to kind of give the court kind of direction in that, and if you don't give the court direction in your own will, again, you never know who the court's going to put your children with either.
You're absolutely right. In the will, you can make recommendations as to who should be the guardian of your minor children. But if the children, if they're adults, then if you haven't gone through the process while you're alive, it's going to happen when you're not here or when you're in your grave, and you're going to have no control over who's going to be the caregiver of your child. And I will tell you this, many people make the mistake of assuming it's going to be the brother or the sister or the uncle or the aunt without talking to that person. Oh yeah, she'll do it. And then when it happens, we see it on the back end. The person who you thought was going to be such a good caregiver now moved to a different state, and the child has no connection to anyone else in that state, or they got married to somebody else and that other person doesn't have the same fondness for the child, and that creates friction in the relationship. So it's critically important that you discuss with the people who you want to be caregivers, and that you have a backup plan in place and a way to monitor what's going on when you are no longer here. So these are two excellent points that really go outside of just assets, but go to the quality of life and the functionality of the whole plan.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you very much for that. That was something I hadn't even thought through, but because I know the special needs trust addresses some of those issues. But if someone were to just do the will and the letter of intent, then that would be better than having done nothing. Next, let me go to Ryan. Ryan, you talked briefly about government benefits. Can you describe what some government benefits are, and if it's important for parents with special needs and what they need to do to remain eligible for them? Any ideas on that?
Sure. A lot of times when you're looking at this kind of planning for, I would say, maybe a majority of families, they're looking or considering what are called the needs-based government benefits, which are going to be financially based in reference to qualification, or at least that's going to be one of the qualifications, which would be SSI, which is supplemental security income, which provides a monthly income for an individual, as well as Medicaid. And Medicaid, I think, and Bernie mentioned this a little bit in what he just talked about. For a lot of times, Medicaid, I think, is misunderstood a little bit by parents and society as a whole as just being health insurance, as just being for health care. To qualify for Medicaid, there are also kind of what I call under the surface services that you might not think about as being Medicaid provided or Medicaid services. And part of those can be dollars for some housing, for what's called supportive employment, meaning a job coach when your child is at that age and they're beyond school now, and what's that next step? Well, if we're qualifying for Medicaid, there are organizations that do supportive employment or job coaching to help your adult child on the job be successful there, and Medicaid pays dollars for that as well. They may pay some dollars for transportation services in some areas also. So the qualification for Medicaid can certainly be, one, in terms of dollars and cents, can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to that individual and family over their lifetime. But it can also be a lifeline to being part of society, right, of being an active member of what's going on there. And so those qualifications are, for those two programs, one of them is certainly going to be financially based, which is looking at a monthly income number, but also to keep assets at a certain number. And right now, for an individual, that asset number is $2,000. And wow. And whenever I say that number, families always take a step back and they're so stunned. They're like, well, if my child can only have $2,000, why should I plan anyway?
Right.
I mean, that's not gonna last
a month.
That's not gonna go very far. So what's the point?
Right.
I'll just do whatever happens, and whatever happens, happens. For goodness sakes, are you kidding me? And that's where some of the protection pieces are going to come into play. The biggest one, which Bernie's going to dive into, is the special needs trust, and I know he's going to take the lead on kind of guiding us in that piece. But that is a central tenet of this planning when you're talking about continued qualification for these government benefit programs that are financially based, but then also for parents to have the feeling of kind of success or the feeling of security for their child, knowing that they can have more than $2,000 set aside somewhere for the benefit of their child. And that's a very important line in terms of for the benefit of, because it's not in their name. It'll be in this very unique, specially designed trust that could have any amount of money in there, any amount of assets in there, and if it's designed right, it won't be an asset counted in the name of your child, so it wouldn't count towards that $2,000 qualification.
Now, I want to bring up a point here because it's critically important, and I'm not an attorney or a financial planner, but I know that it is. Well-intentioned grandmother passes on and has $1 million and thinks that she's helping my son and going to give this money to him and put it in his name, and now he's got $1 million, and we're like, ooh, he's hit the mother lode. Immediately he's going to be disqualified for a lot of the services that you're talking about. Immediately, and in some cases, maybe Bernie or you guys will talk about it later, some cases the government's going to say, well, we're going to make you repay what you've been receiving over the years and make them spend all that money down to $2,000. So the intent is to help, the actuality, it actually harms the child. So I just wanted to point that out, is that we have to communicate with the other siblings, the other people, so that they don't inadvertently harm the child when they think they're helping them. They would disqualify him for the services that he needs. He would make them have to spend all that money down to $2,000 before he could requalify to benefit. Is that true, Bernie and R. Ryan?
Yeah, unfortunately, Keith, the team here really has to include the extended family to avoid the situation you so eloquently described. And I can tell you, as a lawyer, we see this on a regular basis. A grandma, aunt, uncle, cousin, somebody wants to do the right thing and goes to their lawyer, and sometimes it's a lawyer in another state because that's where grandma lives, and says, okay, I want to leave everything to my kids and my grandkids, and the lawyer drafts the will, leaving everything to the kids and grandkids. And then it turns out one of the grandkids is in a group home being paid for by SSI, has been in that home for several years, is very comfortable there, and the parents did their planning properly, so they didn't do anything to interfere with this enormous benefit and need that this kid has. And now grandma drops $1 million into his lap, and guess what? That money's going right to the government, and worse, the kid's no longer going to be able to be a resident of that group home because it only takes SSI. So now, you know, this goes under the category of no good deed goes unpunished, but this one could have been avoided. But we see it happen all the time now. There may be some fixes on the back end, but they're going to be expensive, they're going to be time-consuming, and they're clearly not going to be as beneficial to the family, and especially the child with special needs, as if you had done it right in the first place. And I know, Ryan, you've probably seen the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely, Bernie. Unfortunately, we have, and that's why I mentioned when we first started what you asked me, Keith. You know, what is special needs plan? I kind of described that solar system. That's why we believe that communication planet is so important, and we include in the communication planet, you know, Bernie's letter of intent, obviously, but also something we call the family care notice, which is kind of a one-page template that just kind of writes out, you know, why did we as parents take this step for our child? Why was it important? And, you know, kind of going back to that understanding level, that if people understand, as Bernie said before, they're more apt to take action. And so what we do in that family care notice is also educate grandma and aunt and uncles, hey, what's the negative impact to John, somebody you love, if you do this the wrong way? If you leave $3,000, here's the impact to John. Because a lot of times what we found also, and this is probably my own issue, so I'll let something out on the counseling table with everybody,
right?
Is that, you know, if I don't know the negative impact of doing something, I'm probably not going to do it, right? If you don't tell me why it's going to be bad, well, maybe I just won't do it. And so we want to let the extended family know, hey, if you do this, this is what's going to happen to John. But if you do it in this way with the tools that we created, and you adjust your documents, your beneficiary designations, your financial and legal pieces so that you provide any dollars that you want to give to John in this way, then John's going to be okay. And isn't that what we all want? So that's part of that communication plan. That's so important because, you know, unfortunately, Bernie and I both see this, and you know, and certainly I bet you somebody's watching right now that's already been through it or is going through that situation right now, maybe trying to requalify, maybe trying to figure out how to spend it down, or maybe trying to figure out, you know, what other legal tools are available to do it with. And as Bernie said, it's just, you know, it's so much more expensive later.
Ryan, I remember when we talked once before, you'd said that you had a client who was somewhat resistant to send that letter out to all the potential people, and he said, oh, these guys are never going to give any, these guys are never going to give any money, but you said, no, you're going to do it anyhow because this is the process. Ryan suggests sending out a letter to all the potential family members, letting them know that, hey, I've got a special needs plan going on over here, and please make sure you don't blah, blah, blah. Send the money to Johnny in this way. And this lady was resistant, and you made them do it anyhow, and it turned out that they had a relative that was intending to give this lump sum life insurance benefit to their child, and you were able to stop that. So I think it's important to follow the advice of the people who know what they're doing. I mean, that's one of the things I'm going to cover later on, but you wouldn't hire a foot surgeon to do heart surgery, and you shouldn't hire a general practitioner, planner, or attorney to represent you on the things that's so important to your children. So I just wanted to point that out. But I wanted to bring up one key point. I'm a product of divorce. I'm not proud of it, but I am divorced. And I'm not the only one out there who's probably gone through that. I think if for no other reason, we need to make sure we communicate with our ex-spouse so that they're part of the plan too, because it can still, even though I do proper planning on my side, if I don't educate and train and communicate with her and her family, then all this could be for naught. So if for no other reason you need to come together with your ex to say, hey, we have a common child, a common issue, and I may not like you about it, and I'm not saying about my ex, I really actually do like her. She's a great person. And I mean that. She might be listening, but it's true. We co-parent well. But you need to communicate with them to let them know so that they can communicate to their families about the importance of not spending money directly to our child, because all the stuff that I'm doing here could be all for naught, and the money that they're giving my child could all go to the government, which none of us want. We all pay enough taxes. So I think part of that is the communication plan and including the divorce, and that's why it's so important to talk to professionals who have that experience. So that was me pontificating, but I'm not the only parent out there who has a child with special needs who is also divorced, and it's important. So anyhow,
Keith,
Bernie,
can I just comment on that a couple? Because
yeah, absolutely.
Experience with that. You know, when you have a divorce situation in a special needs family, that makes a situation that's already very complex multiplied by 100. It's just so much more difficult to get people to get motivated to do the right thing, because in many cases they're in a contentious situation. In a lot of cases, the lawyers they're working with have no clue about special needs planning. And one of the things that we try to do, and I'm sure Ryan does as well, is work together as a team with all of the client's advisors, because that's the only way you can make sure that all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted. And we've been talking about beneficiary designations, but I bet you a lot of people don't even realize that you can go to a lawyer and get a beautiful will and a beautiful special needs trust that's state-of-the-art, and if the lawyer didn't realize, you didn't tell the lawyer about a life insurance policy or 401k you had when you were working, and the beneficiary designation on that was not changed to be consistent with the designations that you have in your will and your special needs trust, all that planning can go out the window. So here's a case where somebody took the right steps, they did the letter of intent, they went to a lawyer, they went to a financial planner, they got their will done, they got their special needs trust done, but the left hand didn't talk to the right hand, and the plan was worthless at the end of the day too. So the coordination, not only among the family members, even in a divorce situation, and divorce is very common. We know it's 50% for mainstream America, and probably 75 or 80% when you're dealing with a kid with special needs. So coordination within the family, regardless of the circumstances, and then amongst the advisors, because the advisors need to talk to one another and get comfortable working with one another, because it's all about the family and the kid, and that's what we have to be guided by.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent. Brian, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I absolutely agree with Bernie. That's one of the things that we always talk to families about is, you know, making sure that that solar system, that we connect all those boxes back and forth. I know a lot of the attorneys we work with down here, you know, we're always making sure that we get copies of all the legal documents when they're done, and then we can go forward and make sure beneficiary changes are done properly, and then make sure that, you know, we stay on our folks to make sure that they contact the HR department at work to change 401ks and pension plans and life insurances at work. And sometimes those can be the most dangerous because at large corporation now, a lot of that's online.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they go online, the number of character spaces, the special needs trust, because it's such a long name,
right, never
never fits. It doesn't have enough characters to fit in that spot. So what the system wants them to do is to
truncate it.
Yeah, exactly, exactly, and to abbreviate different pieces. And I say, no, that is not what we're going to do. You need to call the HR department and get the paper copy, because they need to have the exact name on there. I don't want to take any chances. And so it can be, and that's what those additional steps are. That's why all those planets are so important to be connected, whether it's the employee benefit planet, make sure it's connected to the legal planet, make sure it's connected to the personal financial planet. Because, you know, just like Bernie said, and we've had examples that I'm sure he has too, you know, where somebody did this great legal work, and we had an example of that. They came in, and after the fact, unfortunately, we never got to work with them until after. And I know Bernie has examples of that too. And they did this great legal work. It was all done perfect, and Dad never changed an old IRA that he had, and he passed away, and guess who the beneficiary was? It was going right to his son who had special needs. Mm. And all of a sudden, you know, it didn't work out the way that he intended. So
that's those are, I mean, I hate to have those kind of examples, but they're real. And
yeah, me too.
And if we don't deal with it and think about it and hire the right people to help us with that, those kinds of things can happen. And unfortunately, it happens when you're no longer there. You can't help fix it. Your child is left by himself or herself to address it. And that's why it's so important to be proactive on the forefront of that, to get those things handled as you're thinking about them. And, you know, in my previous marriage, I was always the planner, and my ex-wife was a different kind of personality type. So I think in every marriage is always one who's more inclined to be wanting to do those kinds of things. And if that person is you, and it probably is if you're watching, then you need to take the person to take ownership of this and get this thing done. So
another reason, Keith, I think that was an important point is, you know, if the parents are gone and there are mistakes or the planning was never done and we lose benefits, and as Bernie said, we lose housing because that housing organization was only supported by the government benefit side, then, you know, we're leaving that to clean up by these future caregivers, whether it may be a sibling who may live out of state with their own young family, trying to get things done there, trying to work, take care of their kids, and now all of a sudden they've got to figure out this government benefit world that mom and dad took care of for all these years, and they have no idea what they're doing, and they have to get it done quick, or they have to figure themselves out, or John is out on the street, and that means he's living with them, and they don't have any rooms available because they already have 3 kids. And so it just leaves everybody, not just that individual, not just John, the individual with special needs, but really the entire family in a very precarious and stressful situation.
And Keith, let me just add to that these people are thrust into this situation. A, they're not parents, and there's nobody like parents when you're dealing with a kid with special needs. Right. And B, as Ryan points out, they have their own life, and you know, they're going to get a call one day that so and so died, and now they've got to pick up the pieces that you left them because you didn't do it the right way. So you're really putting the kid at great risk of not having the quality of life that you envisioned, and there's nothing you can do about it at that point.
Wow. Wow, I got to change to something more positive. Because that is like,
remember,
wow.
if it's done, we're liberated. Remember.
If it's not. But if you fail to plan, There you
right.
go. There is
We
a
don't have to
plan
worry
for
about any
you.
of this, right?
There's a plan for you. So I wanted to go to Bernie because we sort of brushed over it, but I think the linchpin, the cornerstone of everything is the special needs trust. So could you talk a little bit more in depth about what a special needs trust is and what you guys do to help people create them?
Yeah, certainly, Keith. And I know we've only got a handful of minutes left, so I'll do the best I can to do this as concisely as possible. And before I forget, I also want to thank you for what you do and bringing us all together. You're not motivated by anything here other than making sure people do it right, and I know we all appreciate that, so thank you. There's basically 3 different kinds of special needs trusts, and a lot of clients and I think also a lot of advisors who don't practice in this area confuse them. And what we're talking about here, or what's going to distinguish Trust A from Trust B, is whose money goes into the trust. So either the money's going to come from the parents or some third party, or it's going to come from the child who has disabilities, him or herself. The child who has disabilities may get money because when they were born, the doctor or the hospital did something wrong and there was a medical malpractice lawsuit, or during lifetime there was a personal injury lawsuit and they came into money, or they were a product of a relationship that ended in divorce and there was child support coming in, or they inherited money, as you pointed out in your example where grandma left the child money. But the point here is, if it's the child's money that's going into the trust, it's one kind of special needs trust. If it's the parents or somebody else's money who's going into the trust, it's a different kind of special needs trust. And the reason why this distinction is so important is the government monitors and regulates the trusts that are funded by the child's money, because let's face it, it's the child putting his or her money into the trust. So the government regulates those types of trusts much more carefully than trusts that are set up by third parties. And in fact, for the trust that's set up by the child with disabilities, there may be instances where when the child passes away, if there's any money left in that trust, that has to be returned to the state. So more planning typically goes into those types of situations, and there's a greater amount of time that's spent in trying to plan for that eventuality. Now, once you're in this world of having these annual reporting requirements to the state, of making sure that the distributions are done properly, you can actually have a significant impact, and you can see it happen. And we've worked with trustees who've been there for kids, and you really get a lot of satisfaction out of it. But I would say to the parents out there, whatever kind of trust works for you, the single biggest and most important decision that you have to make is who is going to be the trustee of that trust, because you're not going to be here anymore. And what kind of oversight are you going to have of that trustee? So that trustee is going to decide what kind of wheelchair your kid's going to get, what kind of handicap accessible van, what school they're going to go to. All the decisions you make as a parent that require finances, that are financially based, are now going to be made by the trustee. So many people, the knee-jerk reaction is, well, I'm going to pick my brother-in-law, I'm going to pick a family member. But this person, while they may be well-intentioned, may not have the wherewithal to do it. They may not have the time, they may not have the expertise, because a trustee has to know about trust law, they have to know about tax law, they have to know about Medicaid, they have to know about SSI. There's a whole plethora of things that they have to know about that they may not know about. So many clients will actually choose a professional trustee, a corporate trustee, a bank or a financial institution, a trust company. And one size does not fit all here for different people. But you got to get comfortable with selecting the trustee, because there is a heck of a lot of case law that's come out over the last several years where trustees are doing the wrong thing. Either they're spending too much money on things that they shouldn't be spending money on because the government would have paid for it through SSI or Medicaid, or they're not spending enough money. There was a case where there was several $1 million in the trust, and the trustee wasn't using it to buy things that the kid could have needed. Who knows what the motivation was? The trustee commissions are based on how much money's in the trust, so we hope that wasn't the reason. But not having the right trustee and not having the right oversight in place to make sure that the trustee is doing what you intended, because you're not going to be there. Some people write letters of intent for the trustees. You know, the lawyers can write it in the document, and a good trust is going to have specific direction as to what the trustee ought to and ought not do. But it's hard to predict. If you're writing a trust in 2014, it's hard to predict what's going to happen and what the state of affairs is going to be in 2050. So that's a tough thing to do, and that's where we see many of the complications. So think about who the trustee ought to be. Talk to them about whether or not they've done this before, how committed they're going to be to it, and then have a plan in place to monitor what the trustee is doing and to replace the trustee if necessary.
And those are the kinds of things that you and Ryan help us as parents put together. You have the experience to know that we should be asking about these things and planning for those things, and that's what I think is so valuable. That's why you don't just hire Johnny attorney to figure it out, or you don't hire your brother-in-law who happens to be a financial planner but hasn't had the experience, because doing it wrong has such huge implications. So let me make sure I don't miss any key points before we wrap up. I wanted to keep it to about an hour, which we're almost at right now. Let's see here. I'll ask both you and Ryan, because you guys are the professionals here. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I have not asked you that parents typically ask to make sure I'm not missing something?
If it was up to me, I would say the first thing you ought to do is decide that you want to do this. I mean, look, it's the new year, New Year's resolutions come and go. But if you've been of the camp that, listen, I don't have to do this now because my child's only 6 years old and I'm 42 years old, so why do I have to worry about this? Get with the program. Do it. There's no downside to doing it. It's not going to be irrevocable. If the plan has to change in 3 or 5 years, it'll change. But I can tell you, you will feel liberated. There'll be an enormous weight off your shoulders if you do this. It's not going to be perfect, but I promise you, you'll be glad you did it.
Right.
And what I would add is, and this is not a plug to go to our website, I promise. But
I will plug to go to your website, because you got a lot of great information there.
But one of the things that we create is a small little guidebook to special needs planning called the Family Advocate. And there we put a list of interview questions that parents can ask professionals, so that if I mean we serve families around the country in what we do. But a lot of times you will need a state-specific attorney, or maybe you want to work with somebody in your local area on all this. Well, we put together interview questions that you can bring to your initial meeting with an advisor, whether financial, tax, attorney, trust company, whatever that advisor is, to make sure that they really understand this area of planning, so that you can walk through those questions. And if they don't know the answers, then you know that they don't do this enough. And you need to thank them for their time, get up and leave and make an appointment with somebody else and ask those same interview questions again. Because it's too important just to have somebody know how to do a will and a trust, or know how to do a investment diversification plan, or anybody in those two professions could do that, but they can't do this kind of planning. And so those interview questions can help you weed out who knows what they're doing and who doesn't. So again, you don't have mistakes in your plan, and the story that you want to tell will happen whether you're here or not.
You know, that's a good point. And just so everyone knows who's listening, I'm going to make sure I add all the information and references that Ryan and our Bernie are referencing in our community. We've created a Google Plus community, and you'll find that in the show notes here, as well as on the YouTube description. It's called Our Special Needs Children. And the reason I created this community is to be a place for us parents to share resources, whether it's financial planning, whether it's some new technology, whether it's some new new resource that you find out about. Because when I found out that I had a kid with special needs, I felt like I was starting from scratch, that I had no clue what to do. And then I ran into people who, at a coffee shop, wherever, who said, hey, have you talked to this speech therapist? Have you looked at this? Have you talked about gluten-free? All those were new terms to me. So I want Our Special Needs Children to be a place where we don't have to reinvent the wheel. so that those coming behind us can start a little faster than we can, so that we can provide to them and getting this kind of information out to parents, because disabilities, we got 10-11% of all Americans, and if you extrapolate it across the world, 10-11% of all humans have a disability of some kind. So this is not something that's going away, and we have more and more people being diagnosed with disabilities. So let's help people come up with solutions and come up with things so they don't have to recreate the wheel. So that's what our special needs children is all about. So I hope that you guys would consider joining it and joining that community and participating, not just joining, but to actually contribute, because it can't be all about Keith. I'm just one person, and thankfully I met Heather and Andrew and Michael yesterday who put all this together, because it was going to be a slightly different show if these guys didn't step in and help out, because I was a little overwhelmed, because that's not my forte, the technical side. So we did a lot of stuff, and I want to thank them for that. But before I leave, I wanted to give Bernie and Ryan an opportunity to tell people how they can reach you, and what's the best way to reach you. And I will share all this stuff in the show notes as well. So go ahead, Ryan, I'll let you go ahead to start.
Okay, certainly, Keith, and again, I kind of echo what Bernie said. Thank you for what you're doing, and thanks Heather and Andrew and Michael stepping in to help Keith as well. Obviously, everybody I think that is talking today, their heart's in the same spot, which is to make sure that the future for those who can't support themselves is going to be secure no matter what. And I think everybody's on the same page with that heart, which is awesome to know. And so if people have questions, they can always go to our website, which is, I think, up there, specialneedsplan.com. They can email us from there. We also have started a new site called specialneedsknowledge.org, which is a membership site. It has articles, videos, mini online seminars, all on these kind of topics, so that, again, parents can so you can educate yourself and start to feel comfortable with this topic, so that when you go talk to professionals, it's not as daunting to walk into that office for the first time and have that meeting with a professional, because you're armed with knowledge and education.
Thank you, Ryan. And Bernie, we're going to close with you.
Our website is up there. Our law firm is Littman Krooks, littmankrooks.com, but we've also got another site that is devoted exclusively to special needs, and that's specialneedsnewyork.com. Either you can spell out the New York or NY, so it's specialneedsnewyork.com. It's devoted exclusively to the things that we've talked about today. Thank you, Keith.
Oh, I see Heather popped up a question. Let me see if she still has it.
Just Michael Daniels saying, wow, Bernie and Ryan really know their stuff. You should really have them on more often. Maybe a quarterly show going over techniques and pointers.
Well, then, there you go.
Throwing
I like
it out
that.
there.
I like it. So I'll get them on video committing to it. But no, they've been very, 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 very helpful, and I know that they wouldn't have a problem having these kind of things in the future. I want to thank everybody who's joined us today, who's listening out in cyber world, who's participating here. This has been a joy for me. I appreciate it, and thank you guys all, and we'll see you guys soon.